There's no going back. I am leaving!
I would never let you go. This is your fault. You have blood on your hands! Look at me.
You're a liar! You might try and ignore it, turn away. But it's always there, just out of sight, where you're most vulnerable. It's like it knows that just enough light is all you need to see its suffocating power.
The hardest battles are fought in the mind, not in the sword. This sentence tells you everything you need to know about Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. It tells a story about suffering, redemption, guilt, perseverance, and how different from each other we see reality. Hellblade is simple, beautiful, and very fun. But it's not just a game. Hellblade is an experience that can only be enjoyed and fully understood through the interactive media that is video games. It is a vehicle that shines a spotlight into something that we, normal people, literally can't see nor understand fully: the horrors of mental illnesses, and in this case, psychosis. Today we're going to understand what this condition is and how the game presents it. I'm also going to tell you what happened in the story, followed by a quick gameplay discussion. And then I'm gonna give you my interpretation of the events that I experienced in Hellblade. Events that I think are not actually real. Maybe everything is in Senua's mind. Maybe she's already dead? Join me as we explore the world of Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. If you don't know, the main character Senua suffers from psychosis. But what is psychosis? Basically, the person affected by this condition loses contact with reality with varying degrees of severity.
Voices as well of my friends, and believed that they were in the loft kind of above my bedroom.
It's safe now. You can leave.
Which led to me doing some quite bizarre things, like trying to basically break them out of the loft without my parents realising, and obviously they weren't actually in there.
The symptoms are, for example, hearing voices and other sounds that are not real, seeing things that other people can't because they are also not real, and believing in things that are just not true, like being watched or conspired against. The worst aspect about psychosis, in my opinion, is that it can come with other conditions, like depression and schizophrenia.
We might experience psychosis or maybe depression or mania or other sorts of mental health difficulties.
The earlier the person affected by psychosis seeks help, the easier the treatment is. But what happens when psychosis is left unchecked? Isolation and violence, due to their inability to communicate properly, to be understood by others, and inability to trust in others. The emergence of other mental illnesses, such as depression and anxiety. Self-harm and suicide, because safety is no longer a reality, not even when alone and isolated. Many other things can happen if psychosis is left untreated in the real world. In the world of Senua, all the things I said are portrayed at some point during the story. But how to overcome psychosis? Psychosis is often triggered by a traumatic event or by being genetically inherited to some degree. If one of your parents have or had psychosis, there is a chance that you will develop it over time. Consulting a psychologist is one way towards the healing path, but acceptance is key to achieving this goal, and that is also depicted in Hellblade. The story is set during the 8th century, Myths and gods rule supreme over the tribes and inhabit the world. They worship these gods in a very serious manner, making sacrifices and paying tributes in their names. To them, the gods are very, very real. Senua's mother, Galena, also suffered from the same condition as her, psychosis. While Galena saw the condition as a blessing and called it as the sight, her husband and Senua's father, 𝗧𝗠𝗠𝗘, and the rest of their people did not think the same. To them, Galena's condition was a curse that would eventually doom them all, and they were afraid of what they couldn't understand. But 𝗧𝗠𝗠𝗘, being the husband of the year that he was, convinced them that Galena was in fact cursed and they should burn her at the stake. So they did.
Don't be like this. Senua.
With only 5 years old, Senua saw her mother screaming in pain, begging her to look away, and that was the moment when Senua's psychosis truly took hold of her. 𝗧𝗠𝗠𝗘 still believed that Senua's condition was evil, or the darkness as he called it, but he did not kill her. He prevented her from leaving their home and interact with other people. She could only live to gather wood or something. Years passed. Senua lived like this, in isolation, being abused by her father by being locked away in a dark pit. One day she saw, from a distance, a young boy practicing his fighting skills with the sword. She started to imitate his movements, believing that he was dancing. After some time, they met and became great friends. His name was Dillion.
What's your name?
Senua.
I haven't seen you before.
I don't leave home much.
Oh, 𝗧𝗠𝗠𝗘's daughter. You should become a warrior, you know.
Me?
I'm Dillion. I'm here for the warrior trance. Just come and watch. And bring your sword.
Dillion actually lived in another village, away from 𝗧𝗠𝗠𝗘 and his people. After some time, Senua gathered enough courage to tell her father that she decided to live with Dillion at his village. 𝗧𝗠𝗠𝗘 tried to stop her, and before she left, he warned her.
Your curse will make everyone suffer. You will have blood on your hands!
Many years have passed. Senua and Dillion were happy together, until the day that a plague broke out, killing many in the village, and Senua believed that she was the responsible for the plague, believed that the blood was indeed on her hands. Because of this, she decided to run away to the wilds, to protect Dillion from her, only to return when she finally cured herself from the darkness. Before leaving Dillion, she promised him to one day return to him. Senua was returning from the wilds when she found 𝗧𝗠𝗠𝗘, a badly wounded scholar. He was running away from the Northmen after being kept as a slave for years. Before succumbing to his wounds, 𝗧𝗠𝗠𝗘 told Senua stories about them and their gods. Gods like Odin, Hela, and Loki, and how brutal the Northmen were, the kind of people to avoid at all costs. Sometime after 𝗧𝗠𝗠𝗘's demise, Senua believed to have cured herself from the darkness, which took the form of 𝗧𝗠𝗠𝗘's voice, a dark, cold, scary, and monstrous voice, beyond the others that she already heard. So she decided to venture out of exile, to return to her beloved and live with him once again. But instead of being embraced by comfort, she was struck by despair once she discovered that the village was destroyed and the people brutally slaughtered by the Northmen. Dillion was already dead when Senua found him. He was executed through a method known as blood eagle. According to Wikipedia and their sources, quote, ribs severed from the spine with a sharp tool, and the lungs pulled through the opening to create a pair of wings, end quote. However, it's still being debated if this practice actually happened, if it's made up, a mistranslation, or a misunderstanding of the facts. Believing that the Norse goddess Hela holds Dillion's soul and is the source of the darkness, Senua sets out on a journey into the depths of Helheim to bargain with the goddess of the dead in order to restore her beloved, as she is convinced that what happened is her fault, and she promised Dillion to reunite with him. After days traveling alone through the lands of the north, carrying Dillion's breathing head in a sack, Senua finally arrives at the outskirts of Hell. 𝗧𝗲𝗹 told her that the only way to bring Dylan back to her is by carrying his head to Hela, and the only way to reach her is through the bridge to Helheim, over the River of Knives, a bridge that only the dead are allowed to cross, and only the dead may walk in Helheim. Early in the game, Senua dies while in combat. It's at this time that the permadeath system of the game is presented, taking the form of the rot. The rot is like a plague that grows from her right hand each time Senua dies. When the rot reaches her head, the journey ends and all progress is lost. Senua faces many foes and challenges to reach Hela, but she's not totally alone per se. The voices, or furies as she called them, are always with her, whispering in her ears words of discouragement, words of wisdom, and tips in battle.
She's doing this.
Why doesn't she turn back?
She's doing this for him. She wants to rescue him.
He's already dead.
One more calmer voice, known only as the narrator, addresses the player directly in the first sentence after the game starts, completely destroying the fourth wall.
Hello. Who are you? Doesn't matter. Welcome. You're safe with me. I'll be right here, nice and close so I can speak without alerting the others.
Beyond the Furies, early in the journey, Senua is joined by another voice, the wise voice of her friend, 𝗧𝗲𝗹, who helps her in finding the path to Hela, while telling her stories about the Northmen, his captivity and their myths.
I'll guide you in this life and the next. I will tell you my stories of hell, if I may walk with you.
But her mind still holds another voice, the monstrous, cold, and cruel voice of her father Symbol, who she refers to as the Darkness.
Did you think that I would let you go? That you lost me back in the wilds? I will never let you go. You can't get rid of me. I am your shadow.
But its motives are not very clear. Sometimes it seems to be helping her, and other times it's the worst thoughts that a person can have. By the end, Senua actually starts to trust in this dark voice, so much so she begins to doubt her quest, beliefs, and reality.
If you're alive, and there's no darkness, then you never took him from me, did you? Is that what you want me to believe? After all you've done to me, and to him? You're not a liar, but you're a liar!
Very late into her journey, she discovers that the person responsible for the slaughter of Dylan and his people is her father, Symbol. He made a deal with the Northmen in order to spare him, in exchange for information about some treasure that they wanted. It's actually not very clear, nor what happened to him after that. 𝗧𝗲𝗹 is the one who delivers this information before leaving her to face Hela on her own.
In the end, Senua, it isn't the gods that cause us so much suffering, but those closest to us.
Senua defeats many foes and challenges, growing stronger and fearless with each victory, slowly conquering her darkness and herself. In the end, she doesn't restore her beloved, but she accepts that Dylan is not coming back, and that her condition is not a darkness from hell, it's a part of her. The narrator invites the player to join them in another adventure, one that only time will tell if we will ever experience.
Follow us. We have another story to tell.
Throughout the game, Senua doesn't learn new skills or moves gameplay-wise. The combat consists of a fast strike, a heavy strike, a melee attack, a block move, a parry move, an evade move, a charge move, and a focus move. You can do combos like using 4 fast strikes in a row, or 3 fast strikes and then a heavy strike. You can use the evade move to create new opportunities for hitting the enemy, like using fast strike and evade forward at the same time will stagger the enemy. Evading left or right while using a fast strike have the double use of evading an enemy attack and hitting him right after. You can combine the run move with heavy strike to deal some serious damage in exchange for a moment of vulnerability. The same can be done with fast strike, but not as powerful. The melee attack doesn't cause that much damage, or any at all, but is very useful when dealing with blocking enemies and is a quick way to stagger them. When landing a successful parry, the enemy gets staggered. Then you can perform an attack that deals a serious amount of damage, or go for a combo because the enemy becomes vulnerable after the parry. Blocking is a last-minute resource because of how easy the enemies can break your defense. Viewers can help a lot during combat, letting you know when you are being surrounded by enemies, when they are behind you, when their health is low, when an attack is in your way, when the enemy is one hit away from dying, and when to use the mirror through the focus move. About the mirror, every time you hit an enemy or do a successful parry, the mirror Senua carries is charged up. When it's fully charged, you can use the focus to slow down time around you, including the enemies, giving you a huge advantage during combat. Sometimes some enemies will become invulnerable with a ghost-like form. Using the focus also breaks that. Enemies hit hard, even on easy. Dying can happen pretty often if you don't master the combat and their movements. Aside from combat, what else can you do? You can use the interact button to interact with some specific objects, mostly doors. You can use the focus to interact with lore stones, which are, as the name implies, stone things that tell you lore about the world. It's actually Truth telling his stories, and if you interact with all of them, you'll see an extra cutscene at the end of the game.
Because he is like something burnt. The Northmen believe that he sits at the border of Muspel with his flaming sword. And at the end of the
What you do for the most part in Hellblade aside from the combat is solving what I call sight puzzles. Many locked doors require you to find and focus on one or more specific runes to unlock them. But the catch is, the rune is never fully and clearly visible from your current perspective, so you must find an angle in which the rune is perfectly aligned. At first I hated this, but as time went on, it became pretty fun to find those runes. It felt very rewarding. One of my favorite parts of the game is this one, where you must travel between dimensions in order to unlock doors in the other dimension. The 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏 section felt pretty weak. It could have been so much better. There was still tension, of course, but since you find a torch early in the section, the tension of actually failing is almost non-existent. So here the game relies only on sound to make the player feel tense and creeped out.
Look, fire.
The boss fights were pretty cool. Each one of them had something extra in there to set them apart from normal combat. My favorite was 𝗪𝗏𝗏. The use of portals, if we can call them that, and illusions were pretty fun to go through. 𝗪𝗏𝗏 himself is fast and hard to hit. Overall, a very satisfactory boss fight. It's hard to tell what is in Senua's head and what is actually real, what is a lie and what is true, and that's when the game truly shines. As the player, you are inside Senua's head during her journey. While you play Hellblade, you too have Psychosis. Every aspect of the gameplay is integrated in a way to serve the story. For example, the humanoid enemies you fight are a representation of Senua's imagination based on what Druth told her about the Northmen. In other words, she is fighting what she thinks they look like. So she's fighting something that's inside her head. Huh. While playing, I noticed some weird things in the game's story, dialogue and gameplay. The beast part is a good example. If you let it catch you, then you die. But you can hear it in your head the same way you hear the furies in the darkness. In Norse myth, 𝗏𝗏𝗏 is actually said to be a wolf, but Senua sees it as a giant boar thing. which makes sense because Jdruv only described the Garm as a beast.
A great beast guards Helheim. Garm is its name.
And the most common beast the Senua's people, the Picts, had to deal with were boars. However, according to this BBC News article and other sources, wolves were hunted to extinction in the 1700s, way after the events of Hellblade, so this is probably just a misunderstanding by the devs. The breeding head the Senua carries around is just... what? How? The task of bringing it to Hela is fine and all, but how's it breeding? Is it alive or dead? Remember what the narrator said about the Bridge of Helheim? Only the dead can cross it. Yet, Senua is still supposedly alive and managed to cross it. The same goes for her being in Helheim at all. Only the dead may walk in hell, but she did that, no problems. I don't think it's metaphorically speaking. It sounds like only people that actually died can enter Helheim and cross the bridge.
But she does remember that only the dead may cross it.
The fake permadeath present at the beginning of the game is totally fake. It is the most effective way of using permadeath. As a player, you are always on the edge of your seat. Every combat situation counts as possible step into that permadeath. But that's just in your mind, an illusion, and when Senua dies, she has been given another chance. The narrator even say, a vision of what's to come. A vision? Right at the beginning, you can choose one between two available paths, 𝗪𝗏𝗏 and 𝗧𝗏. The game doesn't tell you which one to pick first, it's up to the player. The most correct way, that makes more sense, is fighting 𝗪𝗏𝗏 first and then 𝗧𝗏. The reason being is that I think these two creatures represent aspects of Senua's life that she needs to overcome. 𝗪𝗏𝗏's illusion slowly grows in complexity. It starts small, like a sound or a voice you hear randomly, till the point it becomes unbearable to say what's real and what's not. Things aren't what they look like. Something that is there now, in a split second, it isn't anymore. Am I describing Psychosis or 𝗪𝗏𝗏 section? 𝗧𝗏 section is interesting. It's meant to represent the burnings that the Northmen did to the other tribes, and since she never saw that, Senua had to experience what Jdruv described. She fled to the wilds after being deceived by her Psychosis illusions, and when she returned, she saw the aftermath of the Northmen's destruction. While going through 𝗧𝗏 section, she is forced to experience what her people did by herself. The two dimensions part is very clearly meant to symbolize how the voices in the head of a person with psychosis change depending on which side they are in the moment, light or darkness, because that literally happens in the game. The Garm part symbolizes how you must stay in the light and not dwell in the darkness for too long. In other words, keep your mind healthy and avoid negative thoughts. This entire section is meant to represent Senua's figurative and literal triumph over her fear of the dark, as she was raised in a dark pit by her father after her mother died. The ending is a representation of Senua freeing herself from the prison that her own mind has become, by slaying her darkness and starting anew.
Wait! What is it? It feels... It's different.
Where am I getting with all this? Well, I have two theories. 1. Senua is already dead, and she's going through her own hell again and again. 2. She's trapped so deep inside her own mind that she constructed an adventure for redemption since, for her, she's the one to blame for what happened to Dylan. Doesn't matter which one is true, if any at all. This applies to both. Senua is a fearless warrior, one of the best, but she's human. Unlike Kratos, which was born a god, Senua is nothing like that. How is it possible that a normal human is capable of killing 3 gods, including the goddess of death? Why everything is based on her psychosis and on Jdruv's stories? The enemies, the locations, the puzzles, the events, that's all too odd to be an actual real story of a warrior going through hell to bring her beloved back to life. Not to mention the rot in her arm. Despite of what the game tells you, the player, it can never fulfill its purpose of permadeath. What happens next? We may never know, since Hellblade 2 is not an actual sequel according to the director of the game.
We didn't want to do a straight sequel, we wanted to do something extra special, and so we're making our lives as difficult as possible in that pursuit.
I think Senua is free for the moment. She accepted who she is and got her fears and illnesses under control. For now. Senua grows, becomes stronger, but not as a warrior, as a person. From a scared little girl that screams for help when the rod is presented, to a powerful and fearless woman when confronting Hela. A young woman who faced her fears despite the horrors, despite everything, was determined to seek her freedom, and in doing so, she became an inspiration to those suffering from mental illnesses. Her journey may or may not have happened for real, but that's not the point. What matters is the message of hope. It is possible to overcome our fears, our own darkness. Stay in the light, my friends. The darkness will come, and when it does, remain fearless. Stay in peace, and thank you for watching.